Hello, my name is Kay. Welcome to my channel Art Book Nook. If you've not been here before, I review art and craft books. Today I'm going to review Painting Portraits and Figures in Watercolour by Mary Whyte. I first purchased this book 10 years ago, and up until that point I always thought that watercolour was a bit wishy-washy, but Mary Whyte completely transformed and changed my view of watercolour painting. Before we take a good look inside this incredible book, I do need to make you aware that this is not a step-by-step how-to book, how to paint a portrait. There are some demonstrations in the book by Mary, but they're more to sort of expand on her tips and techniques than actually give you a step-by-step tutorial that you can follow. The book leans more towards illustrating her beautifully detailed artwork, and Mary does discuss her techniques and tips and gives you insight into her creative process and philosophy. So if you are expecting a detailed step-by-step tutorial book, then I'm afraid this is not it. However, at the end of my video I will describe and point you towards some resources that will actually give you that, if that's what you're looking for. So I do hope you'll join me, because I do feel this book is worthwhile at least taking a look at. We have Mary's acknowledgements, and she also includes her students past and future, which I think is just lovely. And the painting illustrated, called Red, is watercolour on paper. It was painted in 2009 and the actual size is 22 by 18 inches. So in the book the reproductions are quite small, but Mary does paint on a very large scale. In the introduction, Mary shares her personal philosophy. The painting on the left is by John Singer Sargent and it's called The Tramp. Over the next few pages, Mary discusses the portraiture of the old masters and how we can learn from them. In chapter 1, Getting Started, Mary quotes Degas, "Painting is easy when you don't know how, but very difficult when you do." The painting, Wednesday Chores, is 38 by 28.5 inches. And although we can't see the ladies' faces, Mary has managed to capture the very essence of their characters. Mary attempts to answer the question, why paint people, saying the human head is an endless array of interesting shapes, colours and textures, and being a painter of people gives you endless opportunities to meet people of all different personalities and characters and different cultures. Mary addresses the question of talent. She's often asked by her students if they have what it takes to become a good painter. Her reply is always the same: how sincere are you? And how hard are you prepared to work? And believe sincere effort will always take you further than ability. So where to start? If your goal is to become an artist, you'll need to make few decisions about how you spend your time. Mary addresses failures. When you're learning and growing, there will inevitably be failures. In my lifetime, I've met many artists, and without exception, they've all told me that 80% of what they produce never sees the light of day. We only see the best 20% of their work. The key is to learn from your failures and understand what went wrong. And Mary has suggested some exercises to help you in your learning process. Chapter 2, Materials and Tools. Mary has quoted Michelangelo: "A man paints with his brains and not with his hands." And Mary is reminded of one of her teachers saying, "Failing to prepare is preparing to fail." I think this is particularly true when it comes to watercolour painting. With oils and pastels, you can either go over the top or scrape things off, but this is not the case with watercolour. Mary explains which brushes she likes to use and why, and gives you some very helpful advice on caring for your brushes. Good quality brushes are expensive after all. Mary discusses the technical characteristics of paint and goes on to show you her preferred palette, explaining why she's chosen the colours that she has. Here Mary discusses different types of watercolour paper and goes into a lot of detail about stretching watercolour paper and describes with several photographs how she stretches very large pieces of watercolour paper, if you bear in mind that Mary Whyte does work on a large scale. And her preferred palette is the one that's made by John Pike. It's quite a popular palette actually, with a lot of watercolourists. I know Andy Evenson uses it, and I think Brianne Brown also does as well. Mary discusses easels and explains that she has 3 different easels depending on the size of the work that she's working on. And if you'd like to use exactly the same materials and brushes etc. that Mary uses, she's provided on this page a very helpful handy list. I know it gives some students confidence if they can actually use the same brushes and paint than watercolour paper that their artistic hero is using. I was on a watercolour workshop once with a very well-known watercolourist, and somebody asked what was the name of the brush and the size of the brush they were using, and the reply came back, "The magic brush that will make you paint like me." In other words, they actually went on to explain that it's not about the brush, it's about the technique and how you apply the paint. Here is a lovely photograph of Mary Whyte in her studio, and she's provided several tips of how you can make the best use of your own space. This brings us to Chapter 3, Techniques. Mary discusses with you how important is technique, and explains that technique is the means to artistic expression and not the end. She talks about learning the basics, the first of which is the wash technique, and explains the different types of wash, and moves on to painting rich darks in watercolour, because sometimes the washes can look weak and lacklustre, and this is a common mistake for beginning watercolourists in that they use too much water, resulting in weak and wishy-washy colours. Mary explains how to paint watercolour using glazes, which is basically layering a wash over the top of another wash once it's dried, in order to create a second colour. Mary explains the wet in wet technique and where she uses this, and in the image Bean Soup, which is a watercolour painting 38.5 inches by 28, she tells us that watercolour paintings can be made more interesting by incorporating several different techniques, such as washes, glazes and wet in wet in all the areas, and this is demonstrated in this painting Bean Soup. Have you noticed that Mary Whyte has used 2 complementary colours in this painting, colours that are opposite each other on the colour wheel, so yellows and purple. Here Mary discusses the textures she incorporates into her artwork, such as dry brush, lifting out and splattering. And over the page we look at resist, stamping and stenciling, and using gouache. Mary combines different mediums in her work, so she combines watercolour with pastels, pencil, pen and ink, and opaque mediums like gouache, gesso and acrylic, and explains how she approaches painting details. This brings us to the first demonstration in the book, called Absolution. It's a bit hard to describe this because it's not a step-by-step demonstration in the sense that now do this, now do that, but each of the areas in the painting uses a particular technique, and Mary does provide a photograph and an explanation of which technique she's using. So, like I say, it's not a step-by-step demonstration, but it does contain an awful lot of information if you were wanting to have a go at this yourself. And the finished painting, is 34 inches by 29 inches. It was painted in 2010, and it's absolutely breathtaking how Mary's managed to capture the character of the gentleman that she's painted. I think it's absolutely stunning. I could look at this for ages. and see something different every time, even though it's reproduced here in a very small format. Chapter 4 is all about drawing, and Mary states there is no underestimating the value of knowing how to draw if you want to paint portraits, and based on her own experience that learning to draw is well worth the time and effort. And compared to landscape painting, the proportions, particularly in a face if you wish to achieve a likeness, are more critical. Mary provides some advice here for getting a likeness. And the same for painting hands, and states hands can give a narrative about the person's life, work and age. They can be as descriptive and telling as the face and a person's surroundings. And this is described by Mary, bottom right, with a close-up of the hands from the painting Waiting. Here Mary talks about composition and design and provides you with a list of 8 tips for planning your composition and making use of thumbnail sketches and viewfinders to help you. In this beautiful painting called Boneyard, which is 18 1/4 inches by 28 3/4 inches, Mary explains that she placed the textile mill worker sitting on a discarded loom, and she placed the figure off centre in an L format, omitting any trees in the background, so the linear quality of the old loom would have more prominence against the cool atmospheric sky. Mary discusses working from photographs and lists some common mistakes when painting a figure, and also gives you some helpful advice about making corrections, and suggests 3 exercises for you to try. And here is another demonstration for you to study and enjoy, entitled Socks. I do love the way Mary composes her paintings. When you look at the painting Socks, you can imagine that the young lady has literally just pegged her socks out on the washing line and she's walking away. This brings us to chapter 5 in Mary's wonderful book, Values. The distribution of light and dark in a painting will direct the viewer's eye. And there's a saying, isn't there, that value does all the work and colour gets the credit, which is why when you look at some artists' work, their paintings seem to glow with light, whereas another painting might look a bit flat. Isn't this painting, entitled Pinwheel, just gorgeous? It's 21 1/4 inches by 28 1/2 inches. I just think it's stunning. And you can clearly see where Mary has applied some of her wet in wet techniques. And here we have the third of Mary's demonstrations, entitled Cornstalks, which brings us to chapter 6, Edges. Mary explains how edges occur and the different types of edges, such as a soft, hard or ragged edge, or something in between. In the painting on the right hand side, entitled By a Thread, Mary has painted the thinnest of lines right across the image to represent the cotton thread that the mill worker is pulling out. It is so subtle and yet so obvious against the dark background. I think it's an incredible painting and a fantastic composition. Mary explains what affects edges and has provided 3 examples. And here she has given us another demonstration. Again, not detailed step by step, but she explains her process. Chapter 7 is all about colour and how to incorporate light into your work. Mary explains that the colours you choose will greatly impact the mood of the painting. Then she's provided a colour wheel of the colours that she actually uses in her work, and the inner ring is actually glazed with the colour from the opposite side of the wheel. I've never seen this done before, and it provides a really good example of how to create some really lovely neutrals. In the painting called Beekeeper's Daughter, top left, Mary states that she used mostly cool blues, violets and greens, and added just a note of the opposite colour yellow in the model's clothing. And she invites you to put your hand over the yellow, and that you'll see that the painting loses its liveliness. So the tiniest touch of the opposite colour, complementary colour, plays a very big part in this composition. Mary explains what is meant by colour temperature and talks about mixing colour, stating, with watercolour less is more, and goes on to describe how to mix skin colours and add highlights, and explains that a picture can embody almost any colour scheme as long as the colours are harmonious, and that there are no rules for what colours should be used. And Mary explains that light is not separate from colour, it is actually the cause of the colour, and for that reason, as an artist, you must forget what you know about the colour of objects and learn to paint what is actually there. And here we have another lovely demonstration entitled Summertime. This brings us to Chapter 8, Backgrounds. Mary tells us the background is one of the single most important elements of a composition and can make or break a painting, and provides some detailed advice on planning a background and choosing a background colour. Everything in the background should have less colour and contrast and edge than the focal area, and Mary advises you to paint the background first or early. It's generally one of the largest shapes in the painting and will set the tone for all the other subsequent colours and shapes. Here Mary explains how to paint people in the background, which brings us to the final demonstration in the book, entitled Rooster. Chapter 9, Life as an Artist. For anyone who'd love to become a professional artist, this is the chapter for you. Mary offers wise counsel on finding your own style and being original, knowing what to paint and how to know when a painting is finished. Mary talks about the challenges you will experience as you grow as an artist, and the best advice she can give any artist wanting to improve is to paint plein air, or painting from life outdoors. She has some excellent pointers for anyone who's thinking of being a professional artist, and has provided advice on working with models, deciding on the pose and choosing clothing and props, and how to light your model. Mary provides some helpful advice on working with children, and then finally information about the best way to frame your work. So how would I summarise this wonderful book? The book contains a lot of technical information in the written text and explanations about Mary Whyte's personal creative process. There is an absence of sort of paint by numbers, step-by-step demonstrations. However, the demonstrations that are included in the book, Mary does explain her process and her decision making. And as this is a portrait book, I can fully appreciate why she hasn't done that, why she hasn't put in the sort of now paint this, now paint that step-by-step demonstrations, because I think portraits are really, can be quite personal, can't they? I imagine a lot of people will be wanting to paint portraits of their loved ones or their grandchildren or their parents. So I highly recommend this book if you are interested in painting portraits. Mary Whyte's work is absolutely beautiful, and I'm sure that as a watercolourist, or even as someone who just wants to paint a portrait, you will gain an awful lot of joy and information from this book. In the description below, I've put a link to Mary Whyte's website and a link to where you can purchase an online watercolour workshop with Mary Whyte via terracotta.art. There's also links to Mary Whyte's personal workshops, actual in-person workshops. And whilst Mary doesn't have her own personal YouTube channel, I did find 3 YouTube videos. One is about We the People exhibition. The other one is an interview with Mary Whyte and Eric Rhodes, and another one, Mary Whyte, A Portrait of Us exhibition. They're well worth a watch. I've also linked to Mary's Facebook page and her Instagram account, and I've also put links below to where you can buy this wonderful book. It's still in print, and I highly recommend that you grab yourself a copy before there are none available, because like I say, I purchased this 10 years ago and it's still one of my favourite books. I hope you found my review helpful. If you did, please give this video a like. It helps YouTube promote my channel to other people who are interested in art books. I try and post a new art book review every single week, so if you'd like to see more reviews from me, please subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. And if you found this review helpful, please leave me a comment below. I do reply to all comments. And if there's an art book that you'd like to see, let me know and I will do my best to review it for you. So thank you for watching, and until next time, happy painting.